Hi there, my name is Linda O'Neill. I have a business in Austin, Texas called Austin Tarot Therapy, and welcome to my tarot course. I am so excited you're here because I want to teach you how to read tarot intuitively without having to refer to the book or the internet to find out the meaning. If you are referring to the book or the internet, then you really aren't using your intuition, which is what tarot is all about. But not to worry, I'm here to guide you on this journey. I used to be a high school teacher, and I know how to take really complex ideas and make them more digestible for you to understand. You're not going to have to worry about, oh, what does this card mean because I forgot. I'm going to give you some tools that will cement your memorization of the card so that you can use your intuition much better. Whether you're brand new to tarot or an expert, this is really going to help you out. This course is designed to give you a strong foundation in tarot no matter where you are at on your journey. You'll be able to read tarot without referring to the book or the internet. You'll be trusting your intuition. You'll be reading tarot more authentically. And if you are not doing that by the end of this course, money back guaranteed. So let's talk about intuition, because intuition is really about trust. And I like the analogy of riding a bike. You have to trust your balance. You have to trust that you are not going to fall off. But before we get into it, let's talk about the history of tarot. And if you're not interested in a brief history of this craft, go ahead and skip through, because learning the history of tarot is not going to help you read more intuitively. It's just kind of fun. But if you are, stay with me. Tarot as we know it today has been shaped by many traditions. Historians can place the first decks of tarot during the 15th century in France and Italy, and these cards were primarily used as card games, and they were beautifully illustrated, often commissioned by really rich people. Again, they weren't necessarily used for divination or anything like that. But it wasn't until the 18th and 19th century, people from France, Italy, and England, especially in the occult circles and scholars of mysticism, were applying numerology, astrology, sacred geometry, and the Kabbalah and other things into the tarot. So it almost feels like the tarot has a lot of Western European roots, but I would argue that it has also Asian and African roots as well. Your African influences in the tarot are undeniable, especially when you look at the wands, the Knight of Wands, the Queen of Wands, the King of Wands. You can see the pyramids in the background. And if you look at Asian history, I Ching has been around forever. I Ching in China, it's one of the oldest divination systems in the world. It dates 300 years before Christ. In the 9th century, during Tang's dynasty, they were already using cards with symbolism that later influenced European decks. One of the most influential decks is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So this deck was illustrated by Pamela Colman Smith, but it was conceptualized by author Edward Waite. So Pamela Colman Smith, she was born in 1878 and died in 1951. And her background is very interesting. Her parents were American. Hey there, so I had to completely re-record a little bit of this history because I just found out something that kind of blew my mind. It turns out Pamela Colman Smith was biracial. Originally, I thought she came from white parents who happened to be in the shipping industry and that she spent a lot of time in Jamaica. She's a woman of color, Afro-Caribbean. Her mother was Jamaican, and we kind of don't talk about it. And it's highly debated on the internet. A lot of people say that she's not half black because they claim that her mother is white. And those who do agree that she might have some color in her, some argue that we shouldn't claim her biracial roots because she didn't claim her biracial roots. As a biracial person myself, I'm half Vietnamese, born in Vietnam, but my father is white. It's complicated. I am so proud to be Vietnamese, but some people don't count me as Vietnamese because I don't speak the language, because my mother never taught me, because we were trying to assimilate into America. On the other hand, when I was growing up and I looked way more Asian as a kid, I didn't really want to be recognized as Asian because people would make fun of me. But as I grew older, I really appreciated my Asian roots. Unless you're biracial, it may be hard to understand straddling both cultures. She grew up upper middle class in predominantly white spaces, and she didn't grow up in America where the racial lines were so strict. During her early years, she did grow up in Jamaica, but eventually landed in England with her parents with the upper middle class in predominantly white spaces. People described her as exotic. She had a couple of nicknames like Pixie and Gypsy, but she did grow up wealthy. Now we're going to go back to the rest of her history, but I just feel it's so important to bring up that she is biracial, that she is half black, a woman of color, and I've always been very hyper aware of how Western the tarot deck kind of appears, and that's why I'm so excited to learn that she is indeed half black. She has a lasting spiritual history. That is an act of resistance in of itself. And although I love history, I don't have the time to really go into all of the details of her life, but here are some resources that you can check out. There's a book called Pamela Colman Smith, The Untold Story, written by Stuart K. Kaplan. And there's a couple of historians who support the fact that she was biracial, and their names are Mary K. Greer and Marcus Katz. I had to interrupt the previous video to give you this breaking news, so enjoy the rest of the video. Thank you for the interruption. She traveled around the world, particularly in Jamaica, and she used all of these cultural interpretations from around the world to influence her illustrations in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. The funny thing is, most people refer to this deck right here as a Rider-Waite deck, and we leave out her name. Why is that? Well, if you do a quick Google search on her, it sounds like she had a pretty sad life. Although she did all of the illustrations, she didn't get a whole lot of credit for it. And then apparently, she left the occult, became a Catholic, lived in a small town, never got the credit, and died poor and alone. Like literally my worst fear. However, I don't want to paint her as a victim. I like to give a different interpretation of Pamela Colman Smith. Now, true, she didn't get the credit she deserved in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. But at that time, there wasn't a thing like trademarking. Usually you were paid for the art that you did. You didn't receive royalties if it became popular. That just wasn't a thing. And the fact that she was female, obviously gender inequality affected her status. I want to point out the Rider-Waite-Smith deck did not get popular until 1970 because a big company reprinted the deck of cards and made a lot of money. But that was in the 1970s. She was long gone. She died in 1951, so she would not have received those royalties anyway. The truth is, this woman at the age of 21 joined a really interesting group. This group was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And this group was exclusive and had great thinkers such as Yeats and Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. And in fact, those guys hired her to do illustrations. So she was known as a great artist in her time. Now, did she receive the credit she deserved? Probably not, but that has a lot to do with her being a woman during that time period. But there's also a story about how she lost all of her money starting her own art press called The Green Sheaf. No, it wasn't successful, but she tried. She had the guts to do it. The worst kind of suffering is not trying. Now, they also said that she converted to Catholicism and died alone and penniless. But I would argue, yes, after a couple of years of creating these illustrations for the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, she did go and live in a small town. But she didn't die alone. She had a best friend, if you know what I mean, and her name was Nora Lake. And they were best friends for 40 years. And in fact, when Pamela Colman Smith died, she left her whole estate to Nora Lake. So obviously you could not be open about your sexuality at that time. And shame on the internet for implying that you died alone if you didn't die with a man. She didn't die alone. She had her friend Nora Lake with her the whole time. Some people say that, oh man, she turned her back to the occult and she turned toward God because of whatever. However, I take a different viewpoint, and some scholars do agree with me that she was attracted to Catholicism for its rituals and its tradition and its mysticism, because Catholicism is a beautiful religion. That she wasn't ashamed of her mysticism. She just kind of thought it was cool. So let's not paint Pamela Colman Smith as a victim. She lived life on her own terms when it was really hard to do so. And thank you for including, Pamela, cultural references that you picked up along the way from your life experience. It's a beautiful deck, and we're going to learn a lot about it. So why does tarot matter today? Tarot is not about predicting a fixed future, because I believe in agency. My message to Christians who are curious about tarot but a little afraid of it because they've been taught that it's the devil's work, it is not the devil's work. There's this belief that you're manipulating the future, and how dare you manipulate the future by not adhering to God's plan. However, we're always trying to manipulate the future. When we pray, we're trying to change a circumstance that we no longer want to be in. So tarot is not about necessarily manipulating the future. It's asking for guidance in the present moment on how to continue. Like, what are the paths and what path is best for my highest self? It's not the devil's work. Please come in. The world has gone crazy. The world will always be crazy. It is up to us to tap into our intuition, because, God gave it to us, right? If we can nail down the simplest version of cartomancy and the simplest version of numerology, it will cement your knowledge of these tarot cards. I promise you. Stick with me, and let's go on to the next lesson. I'll see you there.